My name is Dot Porter. I'm the curator for digital research services at the University of Pennsylvania Libraries in the Kislak Center for Special Collections, Rare Books and Manuscripts. I divide my time with the Schoenberg Institute for manuscript studies, where we look at manuscripts very broadly, both digital and physical, and I do a little bit of both. So I am here with you virtually, and I have the manuscript here. So we're not looking at a digitized copy, although you can, because I dropped a link in the chat. But I love this because it's an opportunity for you to see sort of what books really look like, although it's still virtual and it's still not quite the same, but it's a little bit closer. So the manuscript that we are looking at today is, I've already lost my link, where to go, is MS Codex 761, which is a collection of 4 ancient Greek cosmographies, that is, texts that look at the world and the universe and how it's put together, in Latin translation. So there is some Greek in the manuscript, and we'll look at that, but the texts themselves have been translated into Latin. The first one is Plato's Timaeus, then there's Aristotle's De Mundo, Philo's De Incorruptione Mundi, and Cleomedes de mundo being the world. So these are texts that are sort of looking at the world. And there's a lot that's interesting. So the first thing, it's written in, by the way, in Italy, circa 1500. It's written on paper, on nice paper. So we'll probably take a look at the paper as we go through. The binding that we see here is leather on board, and it is contemporary with the manuscript. So it was made about the same time. Whether or not it's the original binding, I don't know. That can be hard to tell, but it's definitely contemporary. And you can see
Nick Herman thinks yes on the original binding question.
On the original binding, okay. So, are you okay? Amy has a question in the, yeah, okay. Sorry, Amy, if you can't see that. So you can see that there at one point were straps to hold that closed, but all we have now are the metal bits. So it's, from the outside, it doesn't look super great. It is labeled yellow within our system, which means that you need to be careful holding it, and you'll see why pretty much as soon as I open it up, because the first several quires are very loose. So you can see there that the sewing is very loose and it's sort of coming apart. So you need to be pretty careful. That said, it's really nice. It's written in a humanist hand that is pretty easy to read, and it's the paper, as I said, is it's really nice paper. It's aged really well, so it's not it's not turning brown at the edges and falling apart. There are marginal notes and other kinds of marginalia that we'll see as we go through. I like this one quite a lot. It's sort of a manicule, but it's not in the form of a hand. It's like I think it's supposed to be a leaf, but it looks like a little heart, which is kind of nice. Mostly it's written in a sort of dark ink, but the marginal notes tend to be in red, and headings are in red as well. I don't know if it shows up as red. It actually looks much more red in my from where I'm sitting than it does over the phone. So another thing, because it is the texts are sort of looking at the world, there are a lot of diagrams, because one of the things that this kind of text involved is things like geometry and astronomy. So you tend to see a lot of diagrams showing up here. So here's some sort of geometric, There's another one over here. Maybe I'll pull back again so we can get a more high-eye view. One thing that you'll notice as I go through is that although it has a lot of diagrams, they're all in the margins. So when the text was written, it was written so that there would be a lot of marginal space. But unlike some of the other manuscripts that we've looked at, even from the same period, sometimes the diagrams are sort of integrated into the text. So you can see that there was a plan. We're going to write this text, and then we're going to have this diagram, and then we'll write this text. Whereas here, it's more like they wrote the text out, probably knowing that there would be diagrams, but not knowing exactly where they would go. So they just left a lot of space for that to happen. Here we're at the end of another choir. There's a nice big gap. So you can see that. That's great if you're doing a collation model or diagram like the one that I did. That's helpful. But even if that was not, that gap wasn't there and you couldn't see that that's the end of the choir, one thing that appears pretty regularly in this manuscript is catchwords, which are helpful. That is, you probably know, it's the first word or two that appears at the top of the next choir. And it was put in as a guide to whoever was doing the binding, so they would know that choirs are in the right order. But it's also helpful for us looking at it now. If they don't match, we know something's been bound out of order, or maybe there's something that's missing even. So we can look for that and figure that out. Let's see. So Plato takes up most of the manuscript, actually, through first 200 and something, 218 leaves, I think. Here's another diagram there. And one thing that I noticed, and the reason that I made the model is that unlike some manuscripts, this one is very careful about the text being on their own physical space. So if you click on, I'll paste it in again in case you missed it, and maybe even for Amy's sake, I'll drop out and share my screen because it's kind of neat, and I promise we won't look at it very long. Let me share my screen. Do I have it? Hold on. Here we go. So this is what that model looks like. So it's just a different way of looking at the manuscript. This is the same manuscript we were just looking at. But what I've done is I've looked at the choirs. So every time there's a gap here between these sections, and you can see how the leaves actually are physically connected within that choir. So the first leaf in choir 2 is connected with the last one, and so on until you're in the middle. And Plato takes up quite a lot of space, so I'm going to flip through here pretty quickly, but we get to 218. Here we go, 218. So Plato ends at the very end of choir 22, and then Aristotle starts on the next leaf. Okay, that's not too unusual. But if we go a little bit further, Aristotle de Mundo is quite short, and it actually ends in the middle of a choir. So it ends on 234 recto. So that is the front of that leaf. And then the rest of that choir is blank. We'll take a look. I'll go back in the manuscript and we can see this. And so Philo doesn't start until the first leaf of the next choir. So in practice, sometimes these leaves would be cut out. Blank leaves were frequently cut out because then they can be used as scrap. In this case, they've been left and they're blank. And I think it happens again. Yeah, when we go from Philo to Cleomedes, the same thing happens. We have these blank leaves at the end. And so this was something I sort of did this for myself because I find it helpful to see. I really wanted to see if this was actually happening, and I was right, it was happening. So I'm going to switch back. I'm going to stop my share, and we should be right back here. And so we'll take a quick move back to, let's see, 237. So this is the start of 237 is the start of Philo. And here are these blank leaves. So they said, we're finished, but we're going to keep going there. And this is a great example of some of the annotations that we find in the margins. And you can see the annotations while the text has been translated, into Latin from Greek. These notes in the margin are in Greek. Whether this is a commentary, I'm not exactly sure. The information that I have is pretty much the information that you have if you look in the record. So I don't really know what that is, but I think it's pretty neat that it was annotated in Greek later. And then you can see the space here, and here's where Philo starts up at the start of the next page. So the manuscript is written by several different hands, although they're all writing in the same script. So hand means we think it's a different scribe, whereas the script is the style of writing that they use. And you can see that this is quite different. So we get in Philo, no, that's not Philo. This is Aristotle. The writing is, or the ink at least, is quite light. And then we turn over and immediately this is darker. This is a different, whether it's a different person writing, it's certainly they're using a different ink to do the writing. So that is pretty neat. So let's keep going a little bit. They're loose. Oh, it's very loose there. Let's see. But again, here we go. We have more Greek in the margin, and this is in the same, it looks like it's the same, I don't know if it's the same handwriting, but the same sort of light colored, almost red ink that we've seen elsewhere. So I'm thinking that this is darker, this is different. That's a different hand. That the book was written fully, and then someone's here, this is again different, darker ink, came through and added annotations and diagrams to that. There was, let's see, there was a pretty neat example of a catchword that I wanted to show you if I find it. Oop, here's the other place where we have blank leaves at the end of one text. Yep, that ends, and then this one starts here. And again, it looks quite different. This actually looks more like it does at the beginning, because I'm seeing this red. This is a sort of red tinged capital, which I think is similar to my eye to what we get at the very beginning here, although this is lacking in the capital, which is another thing that I noticed when I was going through. There's a lot of spaces for capitals, and they're usually left blank. Somebody else would come back and fill them in, but in a lot of cases they haven't, although somebody put it there, this is the last text in the manuscript. So that's sort of interesting. Let's see. Oh, there are not a lot of places that I remember going through earlier where people have coming through and made fixes, but there are a few right here. So here's you can see that they've crossed out and added something else. And again, over on this side, which is something that you see that a lot, but I hadn't seen that very much in this manuscript. So that is pretty interesting. Let's see, more diagrams here. I think there aren't quite as many diagrams in this last section as there are earlier on, although there's one over here. So the paper, there's a little bit of foxing, I guess, at the edges here, but the paper is really nice, I think. I'm not normally a paper person, but this has really nice paper. And I don't know if you can hear, I don't have my phone, if my phone sound was on, you could hear that, but that's really nice. And there's more. So I like this. It was clearly a manuscript that was used. Sometimes when we look at manuscripts that get a lot of use, they're very messy. But this one has managed to get a lot of information in the margins, but it's not a very messy manuscript anyway. I like mess though. I like messy manuscripts. All right. That's interesting. It looks like we have soul. So this is some kind of diagram. Maybe that's the Earth and the moon. I don't know. But this is a very typical sort of way that diagrams of the Earth or the sun relating to other objects in the sky look. There's another one down here, which is probably something like that, but I am not. Is anybody here a specialist in that? Oh, okay, Divna, this is really helpful. So I'm going through this section of the manuscript. She finds it amazing that the diagrams we see, which are labeled in Greek, yes, these are all labeled in Greek, are consistent with the standard diagrams according to the work in the Byzantine tradition. Okay, this is very cool, because I didn't know that, but that is really neat. So I wonder, they must have been working from some kind of, they had another book. I wonder if it implies somebody sort of copying from multiple books. So they were maybe they had a Byzantine copy in Greek with diagrams, and then they had a translation. Because all of the translations have been, we know who did the translating for all of these. So the Cleomedes was translated by Carolus Valgulius, and I don't know, I didn't look up who that is or when they lived, but I'm sure it's not, it's not the person. This was a copy of a translation. It wasn't done for here. Cleomedes' text became very popular in Byzantium from the late 13th century, early 14th century. Yeah, yep. Well, take a look. It's pretty neat. Pretty neat here. And I do know, one thing I know from when I was looking through the folder, we have a folder for each of our manuscripts. They live in the shelf behind Amy's desk down in the processing center. And so often before these events, I'll go through that because there's information. There's always more information in there than makes it into the catalog. And in this case, there were a couple of letters, and I think at one point there was an unidentified translation, but it has now been, somebody identified it at some point clearly because it's now in the record. So that's kind of neat to see. So let's see, I'm actually, here's a fun diagram. So something like this is probably sun, moon. No, that's not sun, earth, moon, I guess. Looks pretty typical. While we're here, this is something else that I noticed when I was making that, the structural diagram. You can see that there's a piece of paper here. This is called a stub. And you can have a stub for lots of different reasons. A stub could mean that there was a leaf here that was cut out. Or it could mean that there's a leaf that was put in on the other side. And so one of the things I did when I was making the structural model is I took a look at this. And if you'll see, there's a catchword. And if you check up here at the top, the catchword matches. So we're not looking at a situation where there was a leaf that was cut out, unless it was a blank leaf. Okay, could have been a blank leaf. But what I discovered is that, in fact, after this is a 6-leaf quire, and at the end, there's a sort of an end leaf. It's just a blank leaf. It doesn't have a number on it. And that is what is attached here. So for some reason, maybe a structural reason, that was wrapped around here. But it was a little bit of a mystery, and it felt nice to be able to do that. So Amy has said something in the, okay. So Carlo Valgulius, I'm pronouncing that wrong, Valgulius, who translated that Greek, the last one, humanist secretary of Cesare Borgia. Oh, to whom the translation is dedicated. That's really interesting. That's pretty cool. So all kinds of cool things that you can find out just in one little manuscript. So we still have some time. So I'm just going to flip back to the front here, and oh, look at that. So this is a really typical a diagram that you see a lot. So there's the earth, and then we have the spheres, I guess, the different circles that surround it. So we have the sun, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. So that is, yep. And then those are actually, this is interesting. I don't know enough to know what exactly is going on here, but this is also Mars, Mercury, Saturn, the moon, the sun. So it's circles, but depending on where you are, there's different things in there. So that's pretty cool. That's very neat. It's just very neat. And these are, so this is clearly a different tradition from the diagrams that we see at the end of the book, where they're labeled in Greek, and these ones are labeled in Latin and are more familiar to me. I've looked at a lot more Latin manuscripts than Greek ones. So we have about another minute. Are there any more questions or thoughts? This is a really neat one to look at, I thought. Cool. All right, I will leave this. I'm actually going to leave this open while I finish up. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed somebody asking about ownership history. So Penn, let me take a quick look at, so the provenance that I have is that it was sold to Penn in 1950 by a bookseller in Munich. So I don't know if Amy, you look like you might be ready to say something.
Yes, that Nick flagged an early ownership transcription on the very last page, basically. So there's the first name is hard to read. The last name seems to be Tirabosco, and that signature probably looks like it's 16th century, 340 verso.
Oh,
Not quite last.
there we go. That one there.
So if anybody has any inspirations about what that first name might be, love to hear them.
We would love to hear them. So the last thing I'll do before we go is I will just put these links here, and then we will say goodbye, and we will see you next week. Thank you again. Thank you so much for coming. This is great fun for me, and I hope it's fun for you too. And we'll see you all next Wednesday. Bye. Thank you.